Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Quiche Lorraine. That's right, Mother's Day is coming up, and like I've always said, if you like your mother, take her out for brunch. But if you love your mother, you make her quiche. So let me show you how to make this. Trust me, Mom is going to be impressed. So first step here, we're going to put a saute pan on medium heat. I'm going to throw in some thickly sliced bacon. So we're going to cook that basically all the way through, all right? It should be nicely browned. You don't need to go all the way to like super crispy stage, but just like that is perfect. So I'm going to remove this with tongs to a plate to drain. I'm leaving the fat in the pan so I can cook my onions and leeks, but I don't need all that bacon fat. So you know our trick. We take a piece of paper towel with the tongs and we blot out some of that oil. So I'm removing a lot of it. I'm probably going to leave in a couple teaspoons. And then over medium heat again, we're going to add our onions and leeks along with a big pinch of salt, and we're simply going to sweat those until they get kind of translucent and sweeten up and get tender, all right? And while those are cooking, I'm going to go ahead and add a little cayenne. That never hurts anything. And some freshly ground black pepper. And we're just going to keep cooking that until the onions and the leeks kind of sweeten up. They're going to go a little bit golden brown, and they're going to basically be almost tender. All right, so right there, mine were looking perfect. I'm going to turn off the heat and just leave that on the stove until needed. Okay, for the crust, we're going to need a deep dish pie pan with enough pie dough for a single crust, which is what I have right there. Of course, we have a video recipe for pie crust. Go check it out. It's super easy. And what we're going to do here is we're going to heat our oven to 425 degrees, and we're going to do what's called blind bake the crust, which is basically pre-bake it a little bit before we add the filling. So I want you to take a piece of aluminum foil and just shape it so it fits inside your crust. So press it flat against the bottom, make sure it's touching the sides, and then we need to weight it down. All right, so generally I use dried peas or dried beans, which I'm using here. Unfortunately, that's all I had, and it wasn't enough. But luckily, I also had some glass beads, which work too. What you don't want to do, though, is mix beans and beads, because you know what you're going to have to do after you bake this? Separate beans and beads. So that really was not a smart idea, but I had to do it. We're going to put it in a 425-degree oven for 7 minutes. After 7 minutes, you're going to pull it out. You're going to carefully, very carefully gather up the foil, and whatever you use to weight this down with, you're going to pull it out, and it's going to look like that. You're going to put that back in the oven for another 5 minutes. And when you pull it out, it's going to look like that. It should just start getting a little bit golden brown. There's going to be a little shrinkage, not significant shrinkage, but a little bit. All right, so we're going to set that aside. You're going to lower your oven to 325. And then it's time for the filling, which is very, very easy. I have 3 whole eggs plus 2 egg yolks. We're going to use cream and milk. So I'm going to dump that in. You're going to beat that until well mixed. I'm going to add a nice big pinch of freshly chopped thyme. All right, whisk that in. And believe it or not, that's done. So on the bottom of your crust, you're going to put down 2/3 of your onion leek mixture. Spread it out. 2/3, save a third. Then you're going to put down 1/3 of your bacon. That's right, 1/3, saving 2/3. Then we're going to dump in 2/3 of our cheese. And of course, we're using a beautiful Gruyere. All right, so 2/3 of the cheese is in, and then we're carefully going to ladle in our cream egg mixture. And why don't I just dump it all in, pour it all in violently? Because I don't want everything to move around. I'm carefully layering, constructing this quiche so it has the perfect texture. So I don't want to screw that up. And then once that's ladled in, we're going to put the rest of the stuff on. So we have 1/3 of the onion leek mixture left. Sprinkle that over the top. We have 2/3 of our bacon left. You may remember that bacon from such layers as the first one. So we're going to spread out the rest of the bacon. And then you're going to have 1/3 of your cheese left, which you're going to sprinkle over the top. All right? That's going to go in the reduced heat, 325-degree oven for about 40 minutes or so until just set. So I'm in the oven. I'm giving this a little shake, a little jostle, a little jiggle. And you see in the center how that egg is wiggling and it's very liquefied. That's not set. So it's getting set around the outside, but it's not set in the center. Here, it's just barely set. See, I can wiggle it. It still moves just a hair in the center, but it's not liquid. So I let mine cool thoroughly in front of a window. Watch out for bears. Quiche is not something you eat piping hot. It's something you eat just warm, in my opinion. But of course, defer to Mom. There's the way Mom wants it and the wrong way. So don't forget that. And you can see because we layered it so carefully, there's exactly the same amount of bacon, leek, cheese, and egg custard in every bite. If you just dumped everything in, the heavy stuff settles to the bottom, and it's just not as good, okay? Anyway, there you go. Classic Quiche Lorraine, named, of course, after probably a French woman named Lorraine. I didn't research that, but it sounds right. And by the way, if your mother's name is Lorraine, come on. How you not going to make this? It's perfect. So I hope you give that a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. The French omelette. That's right, you might not think you need a video for how to make an omelet. But unless you've already somehow mastered this magical technique, I really think you do. And it won't be until you make one of these and try it yourself when you'll realize just how badly you needed to know how to do this. Since quite simply put, it's unlike any other omelet experience. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. And as you may have heard, to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs. 3 large ones to be exact. And of course, farm fresh, or at least the freshest, highest quality eggs you can manage. Please do not buy your eggs at the same place you buy your motor oil. And then to our 3 large eggs, the only other things we're going to add are a pinch of salt and a few drops of cold water, like a half a teaspoon. And other than a ridiculous amount of butter, that's going to be it for our ingredients. And then what we'll do at this point is grab a whisk and bust those eggs right in the yolks. And we're going to whisk those for a minute or two, or until they turn sort of liquidy. Right, when you first start whisking, they're going to be kind of thick and viscous. But you'll see after about a minute or so, the mixture is going to kind of thin out. And you know you're done when the eggs drip off the whisk like this. Okay, so we want to make sure our eggs are well beaten. We want no visible egg whites at all. So those are looking good. And once that's been accomplished, we'll simply set that aside and head to the stove to prep our pan. And ideally, we're going to use about a 9 or 10 inch nonstick, which we will place over medium-high heat and melt a tablespoon of butter. Except when a French chef is making an omelet and they tell you to put a tablespoon of butter in, they always mean more like 2 tablespoons. And what we'll do is let that melt over medium-high heat as we stand by armed with hopefully a large, flexible rubber spatula. One that's heat-proof, of course. And what we'll do as soon as that butter's melted, but before it starts to sizzle, we will go ahead and quickly pour in our eggs, at which point we'll begin a 3-stage process, which is the scrambling, the spreading, and the folding. So we'll dump our eggs in, and we'll start working them over with a circular motion with our spatula. And in culinary school, they taught us to do this in a figure 8, but I never did master that, and I found it splashed eggs up the side of the pan. So I prefer using more of the circular motion you see here, while at the same time sort of shaking the pan. And if you'll notice, since these eggs are still very loose, when I shake the pan, it kind of levels them out. Well, basically, we're going to continue this scrambling stage until that stops happening. Okay, when our eggs start firming up enough where we can't really do that, and we sort of have to spread with the spatula to even them out, which is sort of where we're at right now, what we want to do is turn our heat down to low, and we will go from scrambling to spreading. And all we're doing is sort of moving around the runny eggs to less runny spots. And what we'll do is continue spreading that mixture around on low until our surface is wet but not runny, which is what I have right here. Okay, so we don't have pools of runny egg, but the surface is still very wet, very moist. And once it reaches this point, what we'll do is turn off our heat and fold it up. So we'll start at the handle and roll perpendicularly to the other side, but not all the way. We want to stop a couple inches away from the edge, because what we'll do is use our spatula to fold that edge towards the middle, so that we somehow, someway end up with the seam on the top. And because these eggs are nice and soft and custardy, they're very easy to shape. And then at this point, you might think we're ready to serve, but we're not. What we're going to do is toss in a couple small chunks of butter. Not necessarily as much as I just did, but a few chunks. And what we'll do is let that melt and kind of push that under the omelet to lubricate it. Or at least that's what the French chefs say. They say it's going to be easier to get the omelet out of the pan if we do this. But I don't think that's the real reason. I really think it's because they want us to add more butter. Plus, I think the texture of your omelet's going to be better if this sits for a minute in the pan. But anyway, we're going to toss in a little extra butter and kind of spread it over and push it underneath. And what we'll do once that's melted is sort of push our omelet to the edge of the pan, at which point we can carefully flop it over onto a plate, making sure the seam side goes down. Because the ultimate goal of a French omelet is a perfectly smooth, glistening surface. And of course, once it's on the plate, you can shape it any way you want. Some people like to leave the ends open, but I like to sort of taper them. Although maybe after this, I will reconsider that. But anyway, we're going to plate our omelet, and finally it's time to eat. Just as soon as we add some more butter. No, I'm not kidding. The last official step for any real French omelet is to brush or spread a little bit of butter on the top to sort of give that surface a beautiful shine. But once that's done, finally we can eat. With a little bit of watercress, and of course some toasted bread. And I was just about to say I could have made that a lot nicer if I wasn't filming it. But you know what? That's not actually true. This is probably one of the better French omelets I've ever made. Which reminds me, who cares what it looks like? As people in the know, the true beauty of a French omelet lies within. So let me go ahead and cut in so you can see what I'm talking about. And no, I usually don't need a fork and knife for my omelet, but I wanted to get a nice clean cut so you would be able to see this. Because of our 3 stages of scrambling, spreading, and the folding, we basically created layers and layers of beautiful custardy eggs. This is like an entirely different food than your typical overcooked, golden brown, dry American omelet. I mean, look at that. It's just so insanely creamy and delicious. And by the way, if you want to add some of your favorite fillings before you fold this up, go ahead. I mean, you are the Suzanne Plachette of your French omelette. But if you've never made one of these before, I highly suggest you make it as shown, just so you can taste the magic that is the pure and true French omelette. But of course, a little bit of cayenne never hurt. Sorry, I couldn't resist. But anyway, that's it, my method for doing French omelettes, which by the way is the only omelet we're allowed to have wine with at breakfast, like maybe a nice cold glass of Sauvignon Blanc. And I'm not sure if that's the best pairing, but I do know how to pronounce it. But anyway, whether you're going to make this to impress someone at some fancy breakfast, or you just can't figure out what to eat on some rainy weeknight, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. The Denver omelet. That's right, I'm very excited to show you the delicious answer to a question no one's ever asked, and that would be, what is the opposite of a French omelet? And not only was this omelet one of the first things I ever learned to cook professionally as a short order cook in high school, but it's remained one of my favorite all-time breakfast for dinners. Although this time it was technically breakfast for lunch, but that's not an expression. But anyway, no matter when I enjoy this, it's always a treat, and this is how you put it together. And besides 3 large farm-fresh eggs and some grated cheese, what makes a Denver omelet is the following 3 ingredients. Some nice diced up smoky ham, some type of onion, I'm using red, but yellow will work as will scallions, as well as some kind of pepper, and traditionally green bell pepper are used for this. And believe it or not, those are one of the huge keys to this omelet's success, and I will attempt to explain why later. But for now, let's go ahead and continue on, and take a fork and bust those eggs right in the yolks. And we'll proceed to beat these up, but not too much. Okay, if you overbeat these, they're going to start to get thin and watery, and that's not really what we want. So we're only going to beat these until they're just combined, at which point we'll stop and head over to the stove, where we will add our ham, pepper, onion mixture to some butter we've melted over medium-high heat. And we'll also toss in a nice big pinch of salt, as well as a little touch of freshly ground black pepper. And what we'll want to do is cook this mixture for a few minutes until our onions and pepper start to soften, and our ham starts to caramelize just a bit. And exactly how long this is going to take is going to depend on how small you diced your stuff. But keep in mind, once we pour our eggs in here, this stuff is not really going to continue to cook any further. And since I really don't want crunchy onions and peppers in this, I'm going to make sure I go long enough so those things soften and sweeten up. So that's what I did. I cooked that stirring on medium-high heat until eventually it looked like this. And then what we'll do once we've decided that's gone long enough is reduce our heat to medium-low, and we will go ahead and pour in our egg mixture. And unlike the French omelet where we do a little scramble first, here we're not going to do that. We're simply going to give it a little bit of a mix, just enough to make sure our ingredients are distributed relatively evenly. And we'll go ahead and clean up the sides of our pan, but that's it. We're basically just going to let this sit on medium-low, sort of cooking from the bottom up, until our top is still wet but not runny. And while we're waiting for that to happen, we can go ahead and sprinkle over our cheese, which for me was a beautiful local white cheddar. But of course, any of your favorite cheeses will work, including the traditional American cheese. So that's up to you. You are, after all, the Joan Jett of your Denver omelet. And by the way, if you're from Europe and always wondered what American cheese actually was, sorry, we're not sure. But anyway, we'll sprinkle that over, and maybe also add a little shake of cayenne to stay in shape. And that's it. Like I said, we're simply going to wait for this to firm up until the top still looks sort of wet, but it's not really runny anymore. And we'll just monitor that with our eyes and with our spatula, and by giving it the old shake it once in a while. And right here it's getting close, but still a little bit wet. So I gave it another minute until it looked like this, at which point I determined it was ready to fold, which we will do exactly right in half. And that's it, our Denver omelet is done. And we can go ahead and transfer that onto a plate and start to enjoy what is a completely different omelet experience to the French omelet we've made before. Since, like I said, it really does have a firmer texture and a lot more caramelization. And then since I am doing this as a breakfast for dinner, and by dinner I mean lunch, I'm going to add a little bit of a salad, and of course some nice toasted bread. And I'm going to grab a fork and go in for a taste. And while I very much enjoy the soft, colorless French omelets, once in a while I really love this as a change of pace. All right, because this is firmer and much more browned, the taste and texture are completely different. And not better or worse, just different. All right, sometimes I feel like a steak, and other times I feel like a burger. Okay, same idea here. And by the way, if you're not a fan of green peppers, and are thinking I should use some red ones because they're sweeter and more flavorful, don't do it. All right, one of the keys here is the way the bitterness from that green pepper brings out the sweetness in the ham and onions. So for me, that's one of the things that makes this combination of ingredients so perfect together. And another thing to remember, just because this style of omelet is not soft, doesn't mean it's hard. All right, while much firmer, this omelet is still moist and tender. And then just in case you were thinking to yourself, I bet when he turns the camera off, he's going to put ketchup on this. Well, you know what? You're right. In fact, I'm going to put some on now. Hey, don't judge me, especially if you haven't tried it like this. I mean, you might be pleasantly surprised. Or horrified. There's only one way to find out. But anyway, that's it. My take on the iconic Denver omelet. Made exactly how I learned back when I was 15 years old. Whether you're going to make this for breakfast, or brunch, or breakfast for dinner, for lunch, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Cheese Blintzes. That's right, I thought I'd sneak in one more brunch idea before Mother's Day. And this gorgeous cheese stuffed crepe has the 4 things all great brunch recipes must have. It looks amazing, it tastes great, it's easy, and you can make it ahead of time. And by the way, those last 2 are very important since there's a very good chance we may be enjoying mimosas and Bloody Marys during the festivities. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started. And first up, we want to make the batter because we need to let this stuff rest about 30 minutes before we start making the crepes. So into a blender, we will add 3 large eggs, along with some whole milk. And just for nostalgia's sake, I'm going to use the old-fashioned kind that comes from a cow. But I'm pretty sure things like almond milk or soy milk would work also. We're also going to need some all-purpose flour and a little bit of sugar, but not too much. I don't like my Blintzes too sweet. We're also going to need a little bit of salt, as well as some vegetable oil, and a splash of water. And then last but not least, a little touch of vanilla. And believe it or not, that is it. So a pretty basic batter. And then what we need to do, as I'm sure you've gathered from the blender, is blend this until completely smooth. And if you don't have a blender, you can totally do this by hand. Or if you have a blender and you just want to show off, you can do this by hand. But it is a heck of a lot easier if you mechanize this step. And by the way, I didn't show it on camera, but I did scrape down and mix in that flour you see stuck to the side. So if that happens to you, you should do the same thing. But anyway, like I said, we're going to blend that until completely smooth. And when you're done, your batter should look something very similar to this. All right, you don't want it too thick, you don't want it too thin. What you want to shoot for is something perfect. And then as I mentioned earlier, we're just going to let this sit on the counter for 30 minutes before we start making our crepes. And if you're wondering, yes, you can make this ahead and just leave it in the fridge. But since I am going to use mine now, I'm just going to leave it on the counter for 30 minutes while we move on to make the filling. A filling which is going to feature not 1, but 2 kinds of cheese. The first of which would be some ricotta cheese, full fat, none of that low fat stuff, please. And then to that, we'll also add some cream cheese. And just the regular kind will work great. But because I wanted mine a little more fancy, I'm going to use that amazing Italian cream cheese known as mascarpone. Oh, that is some good stuff. And then we're going to add just the tiniest pinch of salt, as well as some sugar. And this time we're going to go with the powdered. And again, just like the batter, not too much. Okay, something like this, we want to straddle that line between sweet and savory. So we don't want to overdo it with the sugar. And then because I'm going to serve this with some fresh berries, I decided to add a little bit of lemon zest. And then the only other thing we need in here is 1 large egg. And then we need to go ahead and mix this up thoroughly. And a great tip here, if you have a few extra minutes to kill, use a spoon, not a whisk. Oh yeah, if you use a whisk, it'll be too fast and easy. So I went with the big spoon and it took me like 5 minutes. And of course I spent most of that time wishing I'd used a whisk. So do as I say and not as you just saw me do. Use a whisk. It'll be much easier. And then once we get that mixed up, all we're going to do is cover that and keep it in the fridge while we make our crepes. So assuming our batter has now rested at least 30 minutes, we'll head over to the stove where I have a 10-inch non-stick pan set on medium-high heat, which as you saw, we're going to spritz with some vegetable oil. You can also brush it in. And when the pan's hot, we're going to pour in about 1/4 cup of the batter. And quickly, as soon as you pour it in, you want to swirl it around, tilt the pan until it coats the bottom, at which point we're just waiting for the crepe to cook, which is going to happen really quick. All right, this is only going to take you about a minute, and all we're waiting for here is for that surface to become completely dry. So as soon as that surface no longer looks like wet batter, your crepe should be ready to remove from the pan. Okay, traditionally these crepes are only cooked on one side, but breaking with tradition, I do like to flip mine over for just a couple seconds, mostly because I like to play with my food, and it's also going to let me show you what the other side looks like. So as you can see, it got a little bit golden brown. But anyway, like I said, this is very quick, and as they cook and come out of the pan, you can just pile them up, and from this much batter, you should get about 10 to 12 decent-looking crepes. And once we've cooked all our crepes, we're ready to move into final assembly. So let's place one crepe down on our work surface, and then we want to spoon between 3 and 4 tablespoons of our filling, about an inch or so from the edge closest to us, at which point we'll fold that side over like this. We'll kind of flatten it out just a little, and then we'll fold in both sides, flip it over like that, and just simply roll that into a nice, neat package. And what you really want to try to have happen is for that seam to end up on the bottom, which mine did. So you can watch that part a few times, but it's pretty basic. As long as your sides are tucked in, and you end up with a seam on the bottom, it's going to work. And at this point, if you want, you could wrap these up and pop these in the fridge until you're ready to serve. But you know what? I'm ready to serve. So what we want to do is brown these in some butter over medium heat, and you can use melted butter, but I'm using something called clarified butter, and I'll explain what the difference is on the blog post. But like I said, we're going to brown these in butter on both sides before finishing briefly in the oven. So we're going to give those a couple minutes per side, or until they're a gorgeous golden brown. I mean, look at those. You're going to want to eat those right at this point, but don't do it. And by the way, be gentle with these. You'll see I kind of dropped this one, and a little bit of our cheese filling squirted out and started splattering all over. It ended up not being a problem, but please be gentle anyway. And then once those have been browned on both sides, we're going to carefully transfer those into a lightly buttered baking dish, because I think these are much, much better finished in the oven. All right, you can serve them straight from the pan, but if you do that, the filling tends to be a lot runnier and looser. So what I highly recommend is popping these in a 325-degree oven for about 12 minutes, at which point they're going to look pretty much exactly the same, but that filling will have firmed up just a little, and at this point they are technically ready to serve, but if you can, try to wait 10 minutes. I know you want to eat them now, I don't blame you, but you will get a better flavor and texture if you let them sit a little bit. So I did let mine sit for 10 minutes before plating up, and there are so many incredible ways to serve these, but I'm going to show you my favorite, which includes some freshly made raspberry sauce, which we did a video for not too long ago, so check that out. I'm also going to use some fresh fruit, so I'm going to randomly scatter on some blueberries, as well as carefully hand placing some raspberries. And then I'm going to finish this off with some blackberries, 3 of the most gigantic blackberries I've ever seen, which once placed gives me the perfect spot to put this sprig of mint. And I know you've heard if something's not used in a dish, you can't use it to garnish with, like the mint. Well, you know what? That is technically true, but just like promoting yourself on Twitter, it's only wrong if somebody else does it. And then, as brunch tradition would dictate, we will finish this off with a little bit of powdered sugar, but not too much. Okay, a very light dusting is considered elegant and classy, whereas a heavy dusting is considered tacky and gratuitous. So please use a light touch. And at that point, our cheese blintzes with fresh berries is done. And I'm assuming you've had these before, but if you haven't, oh man, are you in for a treat. This is one of the most delicious brunch items ever. We have those beautiful tender crepes, and that gorgeous creamy cheesy center with just that touch of sweetness. And of course, both the crepes and the cheese just absolutely perfect with the fresh berries and that berry sauce. I mean, for how easy that crepe batter and that filling is, the results really are spectacular. And really a treat for all the senses. Except hearing. But you know what? We could take care of that by playing some adult contemporary during the brunch. Or maybe some of that jazz nobody likes. But anyway, whether you make these for a special occasion brunch or not, I really do hope you give them a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Lemon Ricotta Pancakes. That's right, remember that time you went to make one of your favorite pancake recipes? But you were out of milk, so you had to use water? And somehow, someway, it actually came out better than the original version. Well, that's what happened to me. And it's one of the main reasons I'm sharing this. The other reason is that apparently I said one of my New Year's resolutions was to up our brunch and breakfast game, which totally sounds like something I would say. And now that we've covered the reasons why we're doing this, we can move on to the how we're doing this. So let's get started by adding some cold water to this mixing bowl. And yes, for the first time ever, water is the secret ingredient. Which reminds me, use milk if you want, but I really did prefer this. And then to that, we're going to whisk in a little bit of baking soda. No, not baking powder. That's going to be in our self-rising flour. We're going to add some baking soda, which of course is going to react with our acidic ingredients, producing hopefully lots of bubbles. So we'll stir in some baking soda, followed by our ricotta cheese. And please use the full fat kind. I don't like cheese made with skim milk, nor do I trust it. But anyway, once our cheese is in, we'll continue on with a whole bunch of freshly grated lemon zest. And even though we're going to add a little bit of the fresh juice later, this is where most of that lemon flavor is going to come from. We will also at this point add a little bit of vegetable oil, as well as a little touch of vanilla extract. And please keep it real. Use the pure extract. We will also go ahead and toss in a spoon of sugar, which, as the TV chefs like to say, is going to add a little bit of sweetness. And then we will finish this portion of the program by throwing in 1 large egg. And we'll go ahead and grab a whisk and mix this till smooth, which will require a combination of breaking up the cheese while stirring. And this is one of those steps that halfway through it looks like you did something wrong. But you didn't. Just keep stirring. And after a minute or two, everything should smooth out. And hopefully your mixture looks something like this. And then once that's been accomplished, we'll go ahead and finish this off with our last 3 ingredients, which are some melted butter, some freshly squeezed lemon juice, and last but not least, our self-rising flour. And by the way, as usual, if you don't have access to self-rising flour, I'm going to tell you how you can make your own, since it's just regular flour with baking powder and salt in it. But anyway, we'll add the last of our ingredients and give it a mix. And as usual with most batters, we're only going to stir until the flour just about disappears. Okay, we do not want to overmix this. So we will simply stir until about 97% of that flour disappears, which is just about where mine is now. And that's it, our lemon ricotta pancake batter is done, but not ready to use yet. What we want to do is let this sit on the countertop for about 15 minutes to give our ingredients a little bit of time to react to each other. Plus, as it sits, that batter is going to thicken up a little bit. So I let my batter rest for about 15 minutes, and as predicted, bubbles formed, and our mixture tightened up a little, which means we could grab some kind of portioning tool, like this ice cream scoop, and head to the stove, where I like to cook these over medium-high heat in a lightly greased cast iron skillet or griddle. And these are roughly going to take about 2 to 3 minutes per side, but we don't go by time. We go by appearance, which is way more accurate. And as the Michael Jacksons of our chemical reactions, we understand that when you combine alkaline and acidic ingredients, bubbles form. And when those bubbles are heated, they expand, which is what makes pancakes rise. And speaking of the king of pop, when we see those bubbles popping up through the surface, and the edges of our pancakes start to look dry, that means they're ready to flip. And if everything's gone according to plan, your pancakes should rise nicely. And as this low angle helps illustrate, mine did. So we'll go ahead and let that second side cook for a couple minutes before removing these to a plate. And of course, we're always going to save the best looking pancake for the top. I mean, come on, what kind of crazy person is going to put the least attractive one on the top? And then speaking of the top, let's go ahead and finish these off with a little bit of butter, as well as possibly a little bit of lemon zest. And then last but not least, I'm going to finish up with a drizzling of maple syrup, which I believe many of you pronounce maple syrup. But whatever. I'm not paid by the syllable, so I prefer syrup. And that's it. My new and improved lemon ricotta pancakes are done. And quite lovely if I do say so myself. The texture is very close to your classic diner-style pancake, although thanks to the cheese, they're even more tender and moist. And then as far as the taste goes, we have that beautiful brightness from the fresh lemon. And when we combine that with our ricotta and that little bit of sweetness, we actually get a very, very subtle cheesecake-like effect. So I really do love how these come out. Oh, and one last thing. I pretty much put maple syrup on any kind of pancake. But with this particular version, which features the fresh cheese and the lemon, a fruit-based sauce is actually more traditional. Raspberry, blueberry, blackberry, boysenberry, elderberry. You name a berry sauce, and it would be good on this. But anyway, that's it. My little twist on lemon ricotta pancakes. So whether you're looking for something new and exciting for your next fancy brunch, or you're just going to make these on some random weeknight when you want to do breakfast for dinner, which everybody loves, I really do hope you give these a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Monte Cristo Benedict. That's right, this could be the biggest and best thing to happen to brunch since bacon. And while that may be a little strong, you have to admit the alliteration was pretty good. But anyway, I've gotten a ton of requests for new brunch ideas, and this beauty, based on the famous stuffed ham and cheese sandwich invented by the Count of Monte Cristo, was truly delicious. So let's get this started. Step 1, we're going to make a batter because we got to make some French toast. So in a bowl, we're going to add 2 whole eggs along with some cream. We're also going to add a spoon of sugar. It's very important this component has a little bit of sweetness to it, so some sugar. We're also going to add a pinch of salt, a little pinch of cayenne. This is, after all, a savory dish. And then finally, we'll spice it up with a little bit of cinnamon and a little bit of allspice. All right, we're going to take a whisk and pop that egg in the yolk and mix that up very thoroughly. Okay, so give it a good whisking. And then we're going to go ahead and cut 4 nice thick slices of day-old French bread. I like to go center cut, so they're all about the same size. And then we're going to toss those in the batter one at a time. All right, let it absorb some of the batter. Toss in the next one. Repeat the process until all 4 have been soaked. And by the time you have all 4 in there and tossed, most of the batter should be absorbed. It depends, of course, on how thick you cut it and how dry your bread is, but most of it should get sucked up. I'm not sure if it's capillary action or inertia, although it could be osmosis. But anyway, it'll all be drawn into the bread, and you might have a little bit extra, but what I like to do is let it sit on the counter for about 10 minutes, give it a toss every couple minutes, and you'll see it will absorb just about everything. So that looks good. Next up, we're going to go over to the stove, where I have a large skillet set on medium heat. I've melted about a tablespoon of butter, and we're going to brown those on both sides for about 2 or 3 minutes. Now, very much like our famous restaurant-style French toast video, these are going to get finished in the oven. That's really the secret. We want to make sure the custard in the center of that bread is cooked, so we don't have to worry about cooking these too long here. We just want to get them nice and brown on both sides. When that happens, we're going to remove those to a baking sheet, and then we will begin to build the Monte Cristo. Okay? But before we start, since our pan's hot, I'm going to go ahead and sizzle our ham slices for about a minute per side. I mean, the pan's right there on the heat, already dirty. Might as well use it. So I'm going to throw in the ham, just give it a quick sizzle. That's going to dry it out just a little bit, and I think give the sandwich a better texture. So that's just half of it. I did 8 slices. And once our French toast bases are ready and our ham has been heated, we are ready to start assembly. So I'm going to use 2 cheeses, cheddar and Havarti. So I'm going to lay down the cheddar layer first. And despite my many letters to the cheese industry, they still don't make oval slices. So I'm just going to break it up to fit. All right, after the cheddar's down, I'm going to lay 2 of those very thin slices of ham on each. You can see I cut mine in half to make it a little more geometrically friendly. So 2 thin slices of ham on each one. And then last but not least, we're going to top with some Havarti cheese. So I'm going to put a slice of Havarti on each, but instead of just laying it on top, I had this brilliant idea to cut them in strips and do like a lattice pattern on top, which I thought looked incredibly cool. Of course, after we baked it, I couldn't tell, but that's okay. It's the thought that counts. So once those are set, we're going to pop that in a preheated 375-degree oven for 20 minutes. Like I said, we really want the custard in the bread to cook completely through. And of course, we want our cheese to be all melty and caramelized. So that looks perfect. And then I'm pretty sure you figured out the rest. I'm going to throw that on a plate with a little salad and top it with 2 perfectly poached eggs. And of course, we have videos on how to do those. I'll provide links and there'll be more info in the blog post. And to finish, I like to sprinkle on a little bit of kosher salt and then a little bit of cayenne and fresh chives for some color. And there you go, Monte Cristo Benedict. And of course, there was no way this video was getting done without the gratuitous popping of the yolk shot. Oh yeah, that is borderline inappropriate right there. And no, of course you don't need any hollandaise. The poached eggs are the sauce. And how did it taste? Well, imagine the best French toast you ever had, combined with the best ham and cheese sandwich you've ever had, topped with perfectly poached eggs. That's how it tasted. It was fantastic. So whether you're going to whip this up for a Mother's Day brunch, or one of those always appreciated weeknight breakfast for dinners, this really was spectacular, and I hope you give it a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Spring Vegetable Frittata. That's right, Mother's Day is coming up soon, and I can't help but think if you make her something this delicious, this nutritious, and this beautiful for that brunch, she's going to be extremely proud, or at the very least, definitely less disappointed. And by the way, even if you have no interest in making this for Mother's Day, how to put together a vegetable frittata is one of those things every cook needs to know. All right, so pay attention anyway. And to get this started, what we're going to need, of course, is some spring vegetables. So what I'm going to be using this time is some green zucchini. I also have 1 large leek, some gorgeous spring asparagus, 1 jalapeno, a handful of baby spinach, and some yellow potato. And by the way, very important, if you're going to put potatoes in your frittata, which you really should, those need to be fully cooked ahead of time. And off camera, I'll go ahead and peel that skin off and slice those up. And then as far as the rest of the veggies go, let me show you real briefly how I'm suggesting you prep these. So for the zucchini, very simply, we're going to cut those in half lengthwise and then just slice them across like this, somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 inch thick. And you know what we say around here. It's not the size that matters, it's the consistency. So pick a size and try to stick with it. So that's how I'm doing the zucchini. As far as the asparagus goes, what I want to do is cut off the tips and try to leave those whole. But then for the rest of the spear, we'll just kind of cut across like this. And again, we're making these cuts as even as possible so they cook evenly. Okay, so that's looking good. And it's on to the leek. And as usual, we're only using the white parts and the lighter green parts. So I'm going to split this in half, cut off the root end. And then we'll slice those down the middle so the leek is quartered. And then our final cut will be across like this. And then once our leek is chopped up, we'll transfer all that into a large bowl of cold water, and we will swish it around thoroughly. Oh, you heard me, swish it and swish it good. Because what's going to happen here, any of that dirt and sand we missed in the first rinse is going to fall to the bottom. The leek pieces themselves, of course, are floating on the top. So as long as we swish that around thoroughly enough, as we're skimming these cut leeks off the top, they should be perfectly clean, and any dirt or sand is going to be laying at the bottom of the bowl. So that's our official method for cleaning leeks. So our leeks are set. I went ahead and I seeded and diced our jalapeno, and as I already mentioned, sliced our cooked potatoes. And at this point, what we want to do is turn all this into a frittata. So let's head over to the stove, where I have a heavy-duty 10-inch skillet set on medium heat with a couple tablespoons of olive oil, and we'll go ahead and we'll dump in our chopped leeks with a nice big pinch of salt. And we're going to cook those stirring occasionally for about 5 or 6 minutes until they kind of soften up and the white parts start to turn a little translucent. And the strategy here is we're going to cook one vegetable at a time, starting with what takes the longest, which in this case is the leeks. So like I said, we'll cook those on medium until they soften up and look something like this, at which point we will add our diced jalapeno and sliced zucchini. And we'll mix that into our leeks. And with each new addition, we're going to season again with salt. All right, I think adding a little bit with each vegetable is just easier than trying to season everything at the end, at least in this recipe. So we'll add another pinch of salt and continue cooking on medium until the zucchini turn from kind of white and raw looking into something that's much more tender and light green in color. All right, not completely cooked through, but starting to get tender. Don't forget, these vegetables continue to cook as we add new ones. And by the way, if you're new to cooking, this is a fantastic recipe to practice with. And we'll talk about that in the blog post. But this is one of those dishes that really helps you hone your observational culinary skills. But anyway, I cooked those zucchini for about 5 minutes, at which point we're going to add our asparagus, along with another pinch of salt, and we'll stir those in and continue cooking until those turn bright green. And all we're doing here is taking the raw edge off the asparagus. So you can check by tasting one of the tips, and it should still have some texture to it, but it no longer tastes raw, which is exactly how mine was. So I moved on to the next step, which is stirring in our handful of baby spinach, which we'll stir in just until it wilts, which is only going to take a minute. And once that's happened, we will add the last of our vegetation, our already cooked and sliced potatoes. And we will stir those in until just heated through, along with yet another pinch of salt. And at that point, our vegetables should be ready to meet the eggs. And by the way, it should be noted, is the reason a frittata exists in the first place is to use up already cooked vegetables. If you ever do have leftover potatoes and vegetables from a previous meal, you could just heat them up and start right from this point and continue on. But anyway, like I said, once all our vegetables have been cooked and or heated through, we will introduce the eggs. So in a bowl, we want to crack 12 large eggs. And of course, we have to season our eggs up a little bit. And we'll do that with a little bit of cayenne. You remember that time you overheard your mom on the phone telling her friend she really wanted to spice things up a little bit? This is probably what she was talking about. We'll also do some freshly ground black pepper and some salt. I know we season the vegetables, but we have to season the eggs also. And then we'll take a whisk and we'll beat this up thoroughly. Okay, so take your time and whisk that for at least half a minute. And when your vegetables are ready, which ours are, of course, we will pour that into the pan, which is still on medium heat, by the way. And once our eggs have been dumped in, we will go with the last major ingredient, a nice big handful of crumbled cheese. Now, personally, I couldn't decide whether I wanted to use goat cheese or feta cheese, so I ended up compromising and using a goat feta cheese. But the good news is spring vegetables go with any cheese. And what we'll do is we'll stir in about 3/4 of the cheese, and then we'll save a little bit for the top. So we'll take our spatula and we'll poke that down in, and we'll make sure everything's fairly evenly distributed. And we'll finish this by topping with the rest of our cheese, and one more shake of cayenne for a little extra color, at which point we're going to break with tradition and turn off the heat. All right, traditionally frittata is only cooked on the stove. It's usually cooked halfway and then flipped over and put back in the pan, which is risky and usually messy. So we're not going to do that. We're going to finish ours by baking. So let's go ahead and pop this into the center of a 350-degree oven for about 15 minutes, or until the eggs are just barely set. and you should probably start peaking about the 10 or 12 minute mark. So I took a look and it was getting close. It was firming up nicely. And if you give it a little wiggle, there's not a lot of jiggle. Okay, so mine was very close. It was just a little bit wet and loose on the top. So this needed to cook a little longer, which you could just continue doing in the oven. But how I like to finish is by turning my oven from bake to broil, which is going to finish the cooking and, as you can see, brown the top beautifully. So like I said, you could just keep it in the oven until it's set. But I do like to do that little extra broiler step. And at this point, technically, our frittata is ready to serve, but I highly recommend you let it cool down a little first. All right, in my opinion, a frittata is at its maximum flavor served warm. I just don't think the taste and texture is as good piping hot. And while you're waiting for it to cool, one idea, which I think makes a beautiful garnish, I'm going to stir a little bit of pesto into some mayonnaise and do a quick little aioli to garnish the top. And no, this is so delicious you don't really need it. But come on, it's Mother's Day. Let's go ahead and make it a little extra special. And then once our frittata's cooled down a little bit, we can go ahead and slice it up and we'll serve it with a dollop of that pesto mayonnaise. And then to put this over the top, I'm going to garnish with an edible flower, in my case a gorgeous, gorgeous nasturtium. So beautiful and so edible. Those petals kind of taste like watercress. But of course, ironically, I will now move it and not eat it, but only because I want to focus on the official tasting here. I'll eat it later, don't worry. And above and beyond how great this looks, this is one of the most delicious vegetable and egg dishes ever invented. All right, while the eggs are set and fairly firm, this frittata is still very moist and tender, mostly thanks to that high vegetable content. And like I said, that goat feta cheese I used was absolutely perfect. Just beautiful little salty, tangy tidbits interspersed here and there. It's just a beautiful plate of food that I really think your mother will enjoy. And I know a lot of you are thinking, sure it tastes good, sure it looks good. But that seemed like a lot of slicing and dicing and sauteing. That for a simple brunch entree, that's a lot of work. Well, that might be true. But you know what else is a lot of work? Giving birth. So if anyone deserves a little extra effort, it's the moms out there, all right? So I really do hope you give this a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.